In this episode of Scotty's Garage, we're going to talk about the cars of Scotty and the impact they've made on my life. Hey guys, and welcome back to the channel. If you haven't subscribed yet, please hit the subscribe button. I think last time I checked that less than 30% of you were subscribers. So hit that subscribe button, click the bell so you get all the notifications. But let's get back to the topic at hand, which is the cars of Scotty. Now, a few weeks ago, I did a story on, my media journey from, basically just a car guy through magazines and into this YouTube career that I've had. And a lot of people were interested in the story, and I even mentioned that maybe I should do a video on the cars of Scotty, and it was pretty much a resounding yes. Everyone wanted to hear about the cars that I've had over the years, and there is over 50 of them. I wrote a list. I needed a list. So let's swing into that. All right, I should probably preface this by saying that my family were horsey people, so we always lived in rural areas, and why that's important will, become self-evident in that we moved to the country, like deep into the country when I was 11, and we had a 450 acre farm, and people would be like, 450 acres, oh my God, you guys must have been rich. No, we were not. We were dirt poor. Like that 450 acres, I believe, Mum and Dad paid just over $1,000 for it back in the late 70s. And we used to go up there camping and stuff before we actually moved out there proper. And then when we moved out there, Dad built this shack, and I use the term shack accurately. We lived in a shack. It had no power, as in no 240 volt power. We eventually got a solar panel. So that's how I grew up, all right? All the way through high school. No power, on a farm, no shed, just junk old cars and stuff like that. I'll say junk old cars, but we'll get to that. But yeah, so dirt poor would be an apt description of how I grew up, okay? No electricity, in a shed, but motorbikes, cars, guns, man, for a young teenage boy, it was pretty much the dream, so yeah, do what I want. Go shooting whenever I wanted, play with cars, play with bikes, ride motorbikes, whatever. That's when I wasn't doing chores like chopping firewood and all that sort of stuff, and emptying the toilet drum. Yeah, true stories. Anyway, if you want to hear that story, I can tell it. But yeah, anyway, let's move on to the cars. So my first car was an XM Falcon station wagon. Now, we grew up as a Holden family. We had Mum had a Tirana when I was a young kid, and then we got a HQ panel van, and that was our family car for years until the cops pulled Mum up and said, those kids need to be in seatbelts, not rolling around in the back of a panel van. And so Mum and Dad went and bought a HQ sedan, a Kingswood. Yes, it was a Kingswood. And yeah, so we were a Holden family for many years, and this XM station wagon turned up at a local's place, and he said, give me $20 for it. It was running, driving, and I'm like, I'll give you $20 for it. I gave him $20, and you might say, where'd you get $20 from, Scotty, if you're that poor? Well, I used to get a thing called Oz Study, so it was a government incentive for poor kids that you could, that's how poor we were, that I qualified for a government fucking rebate. So anyway, I got a little bit of money from that. Anyway, so $20 bought me an XM Falcon station wagon. So that was my paddock basher. Like, I learned to drive when I was 12. Like, I was riding motorbikes from 6 or 7. Cars, trucks, tractors, everything, 12 years old. I used to double my sister down to, we'd either drive one of the old cars down to the bus stop, which was 3 k's away. We were deep into the bush, right? 3 k's away was the bus stop, and it was a gazetted road. So what we were doing was technically illegal, but there's no cops out there. Like, you never saw cops. So I would either drive my sister down to the bus stop so we could jump on the bus, or we would ride down on a motorbike, unlicensed and unregistered, but that's just the way it rolled back then. So anyway, so XM Falcon station wagon was my first car, not registered, first car. And then I also got given an XP Falcon Ute from a local farmer for nothing. it had a problem with its gearbox. So the XM wagon being manual, I ripped the gearbox out of that because it's a wagon. Like, wagons aren't cool. I know that's funny now, but utes are cool. You know, for country kids, utes are cool. So I pulled the gearbox out of the XM, stuck it in the XP, and the XP was my, you know, thrash around the scrub car, and I treated it badly, but yeah, I had a lot of fun with that thing. And, you know, Mum and Dad could see that I was getting this interest in cars. I was buying Street Machine magazine, reading it at school, and all those sorts of things. And it got not time, but it was getting, you know, like, I think I was 14, although when I started to be like, Mum, Dad, you know, let's start talking about, you know, maybe my first car. And maybe I was a little bit older, but it wouldn't be much older. And Mum and Dad were like, well, there's all those HQs out there. We had 7 HQs out on the farm of various descriptions. And Mum and Dad were like, you know, if you want a car, build yourself one. I'm like, okay then, I will. And so I found a HQ Holden ute shell, because the one ute that we had there, the shell was just junk. It was rusty. It had been sitting in a pig pen. Dad had bought it for $50 and had been sitting in a pig pen, and it was rusted out to hell, but the chassis was pretty good in it. And it had a 253 in it. So a 253, a 10 bolt, I think it was a 3-speed manual. It was weird combo. And it even had a GTS dash in it. So we scored the GTS dash. Yeah, so anyway, I buy this ute shell, and on the farm, you know, we, like me, with the help of my dad, you know, but mostly me, lifted the old shell off, put this new shell on the chassis, and I ground the chassis back with a wire brush on a 12-volt drill. So 12-volt battery, well, not a like a with 12-volt battery with cables running to it, to wire brush this chassis. And then I, you know, painted it in rust coat black, sort of this, I can't even remember what the brand was back then, but it was one of the early rust proofing paints, and just this black tarry looking stuff, just to protect the chassis. And then drop the new used shell on that, and then gradually build it up. And then Mum and Dad started to get worried, because they're like, holy shit, he's going to do this, and we've given him a V8 at his first car. And they started to get scared, and they went, you know what, we're going to keep the V8 for ourselves. And they put the V8 in their orange HQ sedan, and so I ended up with a 186. Ah, well, them's the brakes. But I got it going, running, complete, the whole car. And it was getting close to kind of rego time, and Dad said, you know what, how about I buy you a car and I'll take that ute? And I'm like, okay, well, let's go looking for a car. So I found a 2-door LJ Tirana 6-cylinder in Mudgee. It was like $1,500 or something like that. It's a clean, rust-free car. Like, that's what you could buy back then, you know. So clean, rust-free, 2-door LJ Tirana. It was a 173 auto. It was beige with a red interior. It was not, you know, a muscle car by any description, but me being a Street Machine reader, I was very much like, oh my God, this is the coolest car ever. And a little segue here with young guys. I don't know how many young guys I've got watching this, but young guys, girls don't care what kind of car you have when you're young. Young guys always think they've got to have the coolest car. No, they don't. Girls don't care how cool your car is. They just care that you've got a car, right? They want to go places. They want you to take them places, shopping, movies, dinner, whatever. So, you know, that little Tirana saw a bit of action. So let's just leave that at that. But anyway, so yeah, little LJ 2-door Tirana, cool little thing. Felt like king of the kids at school, that's for sure. Until coming home from a party one night, I fell asleep at the wheel and woke up on the wrong side of the road. Like, it was just like a micro sleep. I just like woke up and I'm on the wrong side of the road, and I'm in a 2-door Tirana. So what do, I jerk on the steering wheel like an idiot to get on the right side of the road, go sideways at 100 k's an hour, sliding up the road. The marks were there for more than a year afterwards. The black marks, sliding up the road, off the road into a dirt embankment. The car switched ends and rolled over in one move. I ended up cracking my head open on the passenger side door handle. Didn't lose consciousness or anything like that. I got up out of the car obviously wouldn't start. The front end was moved over like 6 inches, and you know the battery was like crushed. And anyway, I get out, and there's later on we could see there's a bloody trail of handprints around the car where I've walked around the car, and I'm like, oh no, I fucked up my car, you know. So anyway, a local farmer took pity on me when he come past, and he dropped me at the front gate. And I walked the couple Ks back to home, walked into my parents' bedroom and gone, I've crashed the car, and they've got, like, one side of my face is covered in blood. And Mum and Dad have freaked. And then I've just gone to sleep. And Mum's freaking out because she thinks I've got concussion and I'm not going to wake up. My dad has gone and recovered the car. And when I woke up, you know, it's showed up back, it's been at home, and yeah, it was not rebuildable. But yeah. That was the story of my first registered car, and I was kind of bummed because LJ two-door Tirana was kind of the hero car of what I always dreamed of having. I wanted to do things with that car, but never got a chance. So anyway, it got to me finishing school, and I needed a car for my first job, and Mum and Dad actually drove me down to the first. So my first job was at a place down at Dapto, and I didn't even have a car at that stage. So I think they dropped me off down at Dapto, which was a long way from where we lived. So I went and started there on the day I finished my high school certificate. I finished my last exam, and then I was in the car and we were going south. So anyway, so I said, I need a car. You know, I can't be down here without a car. So Mum and Dad helped me buy another car, but they got to choose the car. They chose the slowest car they could find, which was a diesel Gemini. So TE, diesel Gemini. Oh my God, that thing was slow. It was very fuel efficient, I've got to say. Diesel Gemini, so non-turbo diesel. It was slow, but it was so efficient. You know, 5-speed manual thing. But downhill with a tailwind, 140 k an hour maybe it could do. Yeah, like I used to get pulled, overtaken by semis going up a hill, you know. It was very slow. So I kept that for a couple of years, you know. I only had that job for a few months and ended up back in the bush again. And so I had the Gemini for a couple of years, and then I ended up getting my job with Telstra and moving down to the city because that's where the job was. So when I applied for that job, they made it very clear that the job was in Sydney, not in the country. So I was going to have to move, and I'm like, that's fine. And so I moved down the city with my little Gemini and lived at my auntie's place, and you know, but I hate it. It was a cool car, but it wasn't. It was like, it was plush interior and it was manual, and it, you know, it had a nice stereo and stuff like that, but it just was not cool in any shape or form. And so I ended up trading it in for a Subaru Brumby, which I really liked. I liked the Brumby, but when I went and bought this Brumby, I thought, oh yeah, it's only got, you know, a couple 100,000 Ks on the clock or something like that. But I found out after I bought it that the odometer was broken, so who knows how many Ks that thing had on it. It had a lot of Ks on it. But it was a cool car, you know, we could go, you know, shooting with it and that sort of thing, and like I could drive, I could carry stuff around, I could carry motorbikes, because I, you know, still mucked around with motorbikes at that stage a little bit, but yeah, I could, you know, and it didn't use a lot of fuel, but the only thing is when you took it out in the bush and you took it in the long grass would just chew up the CV boots in that thing. So I spent a lot of time replacing CV boots in that car. Every time I went out the bush, it'd slice up the CV boots, and then I'd have to be replacing them. So I got very good at doing CVs on Subarus at that stage. But I always had my passion there for modified cars and street machining and that sort of thing. So eventually I decided that, you know, the Subaru wasn't for me. And I went and bought my first Valiant, right? So a VF two-door hardtop, because I'd seen them in Street Machine. I'm like, holy crap, these are the nicest looking car, like the beautiful shape. And they were affordable. That was the other thing, they were affordable. I would have loved a Monaro or something like that, but Monaros, sure, you could pick up a cheap Monaro back in the day, but cheap is relative. Like, you know, sure, $4,500 for a Monaro sounds like a bargain. However, you know, the Valiant was like $1,200. So do you buy the Monaro or do you buy the Valiant? You know, so two-door Valiant, slant six it was. I didn't know much about Valiants at that stage, I've got to say. I just saw this car. It was clean, looked to be relatively rust-free. I found out it actually had rust under the vinyl roof later, but it was a kind of a cool car, and I'm like, I like this thing, and I didn't pay a lot of money for it, and had a lot of fun in it. So unfortunately, yeah, we had an incident with that car. When I went back to the bush and I picked up that old HQ ute, I went and recovered it from my dad had not done anything with that ute in all the years. Well, I mean, we're only talking like probably 4 or 5 years at this stage, but Dad hadn't done a single thing with that ute. So I said, well, Dad, if you're not going to do something with it, I'll grab that and I'm going to hot it up. You know, I'm going to street machine it because, you know, we'd seen what Ron Barclay had done with his HQ ute, and I thought that was very cool. Why can't I do something like that as well? So I got the HQ ute, I've got it on a car trailer. It had no motor in it at the time, so I've loaded it up. No one teaches young guys how to load car trailers, and that was certainly the case for me. I loaded it front up with no engine on it, and the back end was full of spares and stuff like that. And you can probably see where this is going. So I'm going down a hill outside of Mudgee on the way back into Sydney, and the trailer starts to get a sway up. No one had ever told me what to do when a trailer starts swaying. What do? I hit the brakes. Yeah, so that just makes things worse, because then the trailer at full sway has pushed me into a guardrail, then jackknife crushed the rear end of the Valiant between the trailer and the guardrail, and then ripped the tow bar out of the Valiant and ended up going backwards across the road, where the ute has, you know, not strapped down with chains or anything like that. The ute snapped its straps and ropes and has spat off the trailer, bounded off the other side guardrail and come in and hit the guardrail kind of 40 metres in front of the Valiant. It was a mess. Like, the whole situation was a mess. I had a guy pull up a couple minutes later and go, shit, is everyone all right? And I'm like, dude, I am the only one here. And he's like, what? I'm like, yeah, that's my trailer and that's my car and that's my car. So yeah, anyway, the cops show up. They just shake their head and throw the book at me, and it's like, you're obviously going too fast, and obviously the trailer and the car's too heavy for what you're towing it with and all that sort of stuff. So I got hit with a bunch of fines. And then I rang up a good mate in Mudgee, and him and his dad come out and recovered the stuff for me. And that Valiant ended up on their grandmother's property, and I guess it ended up scrapped somewhere because, yeah, I did go back, because what I did later, immediately what I did was I needed a car. So I went to an auction place in Sydney and said, and I'm like, you know, trying to find a car. I was there looking for, there was a Dodge Phoenix with a big block in it. And I was like, I'm going to buy this big block Phoenix and, you know, run it until it runs out of rego, and then probably rip the big block out and stick it in a Valiant later on. But the big block Phoenix ended up being out of my price range, so I bought a 180B instead. So Datsun 180B, it had some rego on it, it had like 5 or 6 months rego on it. And so I thrashed that thing around for 5 or 6 months while I built up funds. And now, there's a little bit of a mix of what car I had at what stage here, like which one I bought first. Pretty sure I bought another two-door Valiant. So this one was a VG, and it had drum brakes. So I went out to the bush where the other Valiant was, the one that we'd crushed with the trailer. And so it was still on my mate's grandmother's place. So it had a disc brake front on it that I'd put on it, like a VG ventilated disc brake front on it, and this car had drums, so I wanted that brake front end. So we did the brake conversion, and then found out the chassis was cracked, and I got my mate to try and stitch up the chassis as best as he could. Drove that around, but God, that car wandered around a lot. I've got to say, you know, the chassis was not good. It was a mess. And eventually I would demo derby that car, and a lot of people will just shake their heads like, you demo derbied a two-door Valiant. And yes, I did. And that was at Sydney Showgrounds, actually. They had some weird monster truck thing, and they're doing a demo derby, and I'm like, yeah. So I was there demo derbying this two-door Valiant. But yeah, they were funny times. So anyway, then I bought myself a two-door Tirana again, because I don't know why. I just stumbled across this two-door Tirana LJ in the trading post, and I jumped on it straight away. Like, I grabbed the trading post early that morning, had a look. I'm like, I was straight onto it, went and bought it straight away. I think I got it for $2,000 or something like that. This was a white one-owner old lady car. However, it was a two-door six-cylinder LJ, white, black interior, 173 but 4-speed manual with a GTR dash and black GTR trim. It had Globe Daytonas on it, but other than that, it was dead stock. A beautiful little two-door Tirana it was, and what a great little car. And then I'll put some widened BF Goodriches on those Globe Daytonas. They were 13-inch Globe Daytonas, so I had like 235s on the rear and 215s on the front, and lowered it on Petter's shocks and springs, and that thing looked and sat really fat. It was such a nice little car. I don't know if I've actually got a photo of that, and I will try and illustrate this with photos where I can. But yeah, it wasn't super fast. And then one day down at the pub, I used to go to the pub a lot with my mates, you know, and play pool comps and stuff like that. And this young guy down the pub had an LC Tirana he was trying to sell for like $1,000. And like, it was pretty beaten up. You know, like, it wasn't super bad, but it wasn't great. You know, it certainly wasn't as nice as my Tirana. But it had a 192 and triples in it for $1,000. I'm like, yeah, dude, I'll buy that. So I bought that, ripped the motor out, stuck it in my LJ. I ended up using that LC body, and it was a two-door LC Tirana. I used that in my one and only adventure into speedway racing. It was like a street stock class up at Newcastle. We hired a little Hino truck and we loaded it on and took it up there, and man, bloody speedway. I'll tell you what, every panel on that car was just pushed in after one round, you know, and I'm like, holy crap, speedway is not for me if every bastard's going to run into you all the time. And that's what it was. It was kind of a demo derby on the move, you know. Everyone's traveling in an oval, but oh Jesus, you know, you'd have some guy get his bumper in and just ripped all the way up the side of the car, and just it was terrible. So I didn't play speedway anymore after that. But it was a shame that little two-door LC went that way. And then the LJ, I thought I was going to street machine it and do all the things. And I decided I was going to supercharge the six-cylinder in it. But in the meantime, I'd had a bit of a race with one of my mates with a Centura. He had a Centura with actually it was 245 auto Centura, and it just absolutely laid waste to my little Tirana with triples on it. Yeah, it was just demoralising how, and I took that car, the Tirana, down to Brad's Speed Shop in Sydney and got him to put on the dyno, and it made 70 horsepower at the tyres, and I'm like, what the fuck, it should make more than that. And they agreed it should make more, but they couldn't tell me what was wrong with it. I eventually found out that it was starving for fuel. The fuel line was crushed, the hard fuel line. We'd obviously bumped it when we put the motor in it and crushed the fuel line flat, and it was starving the thing of fuel, but they couldn't tell me that, which I was very disappointed at the time. And it also, that cemented in me the idea that I needed to be self-sufficient with cars, needed to learn as much as I could about doing stuff myself, because, you know, if you're trying to pay the experts and they can't tell you what's wrong with the car, then what's the point of the experts? So anyway, so the Tirana I'd pulled down, and I bought myself a Centura as a drive-around car while I was building up the Tirana. And, you know, like, I totally stripped it out, and it had a couple little pieces of rust that I bought myself a MIG welder, and I started trying to learn how to do these rust repairs, and I wasn't doing it very well, I've got to say. It was a cheap MiG, and you know, we're talking about a cheap MiG in the early 90s. They just weren't that good. And I'm trying to do, you know, rust repairs and just making a total hash of it. But in the meantime, I'm playing with this Centura, and I end up putting a 265 in the Centura. Now the Centura was a 3-speed on the floor manual, like the old Pacers were, but tell you what, it was a mildly rapid car. Like it only, like I took it out the drags, and I was running 17s, I think. I think I got it into the 16s at the drags. But, you know, it was a bit of fun, but it really did get the bug to bite for drag racing. So I used to go to Eastern Creek Raceway and run in the Wednesday nights and that sort of thing, have some fun. And that little Centura, you know, like I said, it was a bit of fun, and I realised though that manual was definitely not the way to go for drag racing. And the 265, you could certainly do a lot with those. And even my cousin ended up buying one that was 265 4-speed, and that car was a mid 15-second car. We ended up, another mate, the one that had the original Centura, he bought one with a 265 and an auto, and had a bit of work done to it. We ran 14s with that car. So you could buy a Centura and put a 265 in it, and it would walk a V8 Tirana any day of the week. Like, we had a lot of fun with those things. But still, yeah, the Centura was a bit of fun, but I thought the 6-cylinder thing just seemed too hard. So I thought I need to get into a V8. And I'd met my wife at this stage. Well, she was my girlfriend at this stage. You know, we'd met at karate, and I'd met Jason Gray at karate and all that sort of stuff. You know, hooning around in this little Centura. And I found a 2-door Valiant for sale in the trading post again, and my then girlfriend lent me the money to buy this unfinished project of a 2-door Valiant. It was painted and rust free, so freshly painted, hadn't been buffed, had a complete interior, just didn't have windscreens or bumpers on it, didn't have an engine and box. So I picked up another Valiant from a Valiant specialist, Paul Dunk, and I pulled out the 318 and auto out of that, and I bought this other car for $1,200 with my girlfriend's money, and I combined the two and drove it back to the guy's place, registered a week later to pick up the spares that he promised me. He was devastated that I'd actually bought this car and got it running and registered in the space of a week. And but yeah, I had that 2-door, it was a VG 770 hardtop, and I had that car for quite a few years and raced it a lot, won a lot of trophies with it in Dial Your Own racing. This is something people don't, you know, because I run Drag Challenge these days, I got all these guys that, you know, the entrants, they try and tell me how drag racing works. They're assuming that I'm just the street machine guy and I don't understand how it all works. Not knowing that I've been a drag racer for over 30 years, you know. So anyway, so I won a lot of trophies doing Dial Your Own stuff with that 2-door Valiant. And I thought, it was just a 318 auto, had a stall converter and a 4-barrel and a few other things. I think I ended up running a best of a 15 flat with that, but it was consistent, super consistent, that car. So I ended up at a Valiant show. I saw a for sale sign for this Pacer, and guy said, you know, Valiant Pacer, no motor or transmission, $700. And I'm like, okay, that sounds like a bit of a deal. I go and see this thing, and it's Varshi Blue, which is a rare Pacer colour. So blue, Pacer hardtop, no motor, no box. Me and my mate Tony, we go pick up this thing. We nearly crashed it on the way home because we put it on the car trailer. Again, front up, no motor. I hadn't learnt my lesson at that stage, and we had a massive trailer sway up on the freeway coming home. But we managed to get it home, and so I bought this, like I said, 2-door Valiant. And I had a 340 I'd been building up, and I put the 340 in that 2-door Valiant, and I thought, this thing's going to be fast. Then, well, what should happen? But so when I bought this 2-door Valiant, the guy told me he'd had a V8 in it. I'm like, cool, so it's already got a V8 K-frame. That makes my job easier. And it was floor shift and all those things, and I'm like, okay. So I used the oil lines, the V8 remote filter oil lines that came with the car. Now the guy had told me the engine had died, but it didn't twig that the engine had died because of the friggin' oil lines. So on the outside they were this big, on the inside they were 1/4 inch, they were tiny. And stupid me did not hook up an oil pressure gauge when I first fired that thing up. Just dumb young car guy things, you know. I thought, it's a brand new engine, it's gonna have oil pressure. And sure, it had oil pressure at idle, you know, but what had happened was when you revved it up, the lines were so small that they would starve the oil pump of oil, and the oil pressure would just plummet straight away. It would just go to the floor. As soon as you started giving it any revs, the oil pressure would plummet. So eventually, it didn't take too long, but I spun a bearing in that 340, which really devastated me. And then I went and found a 360 at Wreckers, put the 360 in place of the 340, added all the bits from the 340 on it, and checked the oil pressure when I fired it up and discovered the problem. So I'm like, oh, okay, here's our problem. So make up new oil lines of a decent size, so -10 oil lines, and had a lot of fun with that car. I think we went 14-0 with that car. I raced it at a couple of the performance street car shootouts, even drove it up to Queensland, raced up there at Willowbank at the performance street car shootout. I used to say to my wife, you know, like, what's on in Queensland, you know, and she'd be like, what drag race is on? I'm like, oh, okay. Yeah, no, performance street car shootouts. And she'd be like, oh, well, Bon Jovi's playing in Brisbane that weekend, so yeah, we can go as long as you take me to Bon Jovi. So we did that one night. Went up the performance street car shootout, and then we stood in Bon Jovi in the rain, and then drove home in a V8 Pacer, and then went racing the next day, you know. So that was a lot of fun. We used to do a lot of family trips like that, pre-Alex, but yeah, pre-children really. So yeah, children, they're fun, but tell you what, they will limit your lifestyle a little bit. So anyway, so I had we had both of the cars at the same time. So I had the 318 VG hardtop, the 770, which was a beautiful street car, and that was our daily. We drove that everywhere for years. And then we had the hottie, which was the Pacer with the 360. Me and my wife even raced them once together at Eastern Creek Raceway. That was a bit of fun. But eventually I thought, I want to build something even better. I wanted to run Super Street at the National Championships. So to do that, I needed to run 12.99 or better. I needed to build something faster. So I sold the two-door Valiant, like the VG, the grey one. I sold it first and bought a rolling shell, a Charger, and it was a VH Charger. The car was originally a 770 car, but someone had obviously crashed an RT somewhere because all the RT bits ended up in this 770. And I know people are probably saying, it was probably an RT 770, that was super rare. Yes, they did exist, but this was not an RT 770. This was just the VH 770 that someone had transferred a whole bunch of 6-pack Charger bits in it, because it had the twin fillers and the big tank in the boot, and it all done very professionally. Like, you really couldn't tell that this was not standard. But that car, yeah, Mercury silver with the black stripes, and it had Recaro trim seats and stuff in it. And I paid $3,500 for that car as a roller. What a bargain. And then I built up a underbonnet blown 360 small block, so a B&M blower on a 360 bottom end. So originally I just did a low compression 360 in it, knowing I was going to supercharge it. Drove it around, got it registered with the 360, non-supercharged. And then I talked to the guys at Max Wedge Performance, who did a lot of supercharger kits back then. And I got Bill Laney to make me up a custom supercharger manifold to run this. It was a Chevy kit that I'd bought off a guy. So B&M Chevy kit, brand new, I'd bought. And took it to Bill and said, Bill, can you make a manifold up to suit this blower? And he cast up a manifold for me. We got the kit onto the car. And man, that car went 12.7 at 107 mile an hour, cast headed, pump super, full exhaust, tools and spares in the back, because I didn't trust you know, the people at Eastern Creek Raceway to not steal all your tools and shit when you left them out there. Yeah, like I used to drive that thing out to Eastern Creek Raceway, run it with all the tools and spares and shit in the boot, and run 12.7 on street tyres, like 235 Kelly Chargers, drive it home. That thing was a good, tough street car. Never did run at the national championships. I ran at a whole bunch of drag racing events with it, but never did a national championship meet with that car, which is what my intentions were, because right around that time, drag racing imploded in New South Wales. So they stopped racing at Eastern Creek Raceway. Canberra shut down. There was pretty much no drag racing at this point. And, you know, we did big protests to try and get a drag strip built. Eventually that resulted in what was originally Western Sydney International Dragway, and then later became Sydney Dragway. But yeah, that was all around that time. Sorry, we had a little bit of a technical difficulty there when the memory camera on my camera filled up, and then of course I started recording and it started raining. So rain has stopped, so we'll continue on with the story. So where were we? We were with the Charger. That's right. So Western Sydney Dragway had not started at this stage. I think I'd managed to race at the last couple of meetings at Eastern Creek and Canberra. Even won the Street Machine bracket, the Nostalgia titles in Canberra. Was sponsored by Street Machine magazine. I ended up in Street Machine magazine for taking the win, which was pretty cool, and $800, which was pretty decent purse back then, I've got to say. So I had a lot of fun with that Charger. Raced it for about 4 years wherever I could. Took it to Summernats pretty much every year.
Yeah, we've got the green flag. That's going to be all right. And not a shabby time either, an 820.
It went pretty well. Didn't make a heap of horsepower. And he made like 270 horsepower at the tyres, I think is what we saw on the dyno at Summernats. But this is at the time, you know, when Jason was winning with, you know, 406, you know, or whatever it was. So just over 400 horsepower would win the competition. So 270, I guess, wasn't too bad for an engine I'd built myself, cast-headed, pump super. It was not, you know, a particularly fancy build. Just had a flat tappet cam in it, not a big cam at all either. So yeah, it did okay. It did okay for what it was. But of course, I wanted more and wanted to do more. I ended up blowing up 2 transmissions and 2 diff centers in that car. I think on the second transmission I decided I'd had enough, and I pulled the engine out, and I was going to build a bigger blown car. So I bought an AP6 Ute. Why, I don't know. At this stage, I'm kind of, at the time it felt like it was kind of something I wanted to do. I wanted to do like an AP5, AP6 Ute with a blown 671 in it and tubbed and that. I thought that was going to be cool. I don't know why I thought that was going to be cool, because I built the car. I built it. I bought an AP6 Ute. It had a 273 auto in it. Such a nice car. The guy didn't, like, he advertised it, and I went with the money, and I didn't haggle. I just went, dude, here's the money. And at the time the guy was like, he realised this was the time he was going to sell this car that he slaved away and he built. And I'm like, I'll just, you know, you wanted the money, here's the money. And he ended up relenting and selling me the car, and I ruined that car, I've got to say. But yeah, I built, my intention was to have this car as a engineered, well, sort of engineered, but legally registered, I guess I should say, V8. So at the time you could not put a 360 in an AP Ute and get it registered, because it went over the cubic inch to weight measurements. So what I did was I built a 360 cubic inch combo inside a 318 block. So I found a 318 truck block, bought it out to 4-inch bores, put 4Gs in it, and got a 360 crank cut down because the mains are bigger on a 360, cut down the main bearings. And we had 360 cubic inches inside an engine that physically, all the numbers, everything said 318, all right? And this is where you get these crazy stories, and the guy's going, you know, he'll sell you an engine, go, oh man, that's a stroker. I even bought, there's one on the list I didn't mention, a Chrysler by Chrysler sedan I bought way back. The guy swore to me that it was a stroker. It wasn't, it was a 360 bottom end. But why I bought it is it had a set of 6-pack carbies on it. That's right, V8 6-pack. So like your 340 6-pack, it had a 6-pack carby set up on it. And you can't hide that. You can't pretend it's something else. It's like, it didn't have actual correct carbies on it. They were like kind of jury-rigged 2 barrels that had been cut and sliced and stuff. But it was a 6-pack manifold with 6-pack carbies. It looked cool. And so I bought the car off him on the basis of that alone. It did end up having good heads with big valves in it, stuff like that. But it never had a stroker crank in it or anything. Anyway, I got sidetracked there. So I built the AP6U with the blown 360 in it. And holy shit, that car, no one really ever saw it. There's a couple mates that saw it. And, you know, I had fun, a little bit of fun with it in that I drive it around and everything would stop. It was weird. Like everywhere you drove, the traffic would stop. People would be having accidents. Everyone was stopped on the sidewalks. So it was just, and it freaked me out. Like the car freaked me out in such, in people's reactions to the car, it freaked me out that much that I stopped. I wouldn't drive it. I wouldn't drive it anywhere. And then I went to take it to Summernats. We were going to drive this thing to Canberra from Sydney. So we're going to drive it the 3.5, 4 hours down to Canberra in this 671 blown APU. We were entered, we were ready to leave. And I get on the road and I thought, well, I'm just going to give it a hit and see what happens, because if it breaks here, I'm at least 5 minutes from home. But if it breaks down there, I'm like a long way from home. And what's it do? It pushes out the head gasket. Like it smoked the tyres, like it smoked, left marks down the road, but then pushed out a head gasket. And I'm like, well, there you go. So I took it back, put it in the garage, and we ended up taking my work Camry down to Summernats. I think it was it was one of the last times I was actually as an entrant. Yeah, and didn't end up getting to take my car in. We just went down and hung out and, you know, did Summernats as entrance, but entrance without cars kind of thing. So anyway, so yeah, I was so disheartened with that thing. I didn't touch it for a month. Then I got back in, I fixed the head gasket, took it out for a drive again, and, you know, just kind of, and it, like I said, it was just freaking me out. And so I ended up advertising the engine. I'm like, you know what, this is too much. And I'd had other problems with it. Like the first time I drove it, the balancer just come apart. It broke the balancer and stuff like that, you know, just so it was one of those things that I knew it was just going to be a car that was just going to break my heart every time I drove the thing. So I ended up advertising the motor, and a guy came to buy it, and I take it out on the road and I give it a hit, and the dude's just straight away just gone, I'll buy it. Like, he's like, I'll buy it. And stupid me, what do? I'm taking him back home and I give it another hit, and it pushes the fucking head gasket out again. And I'm just like, and yeah, it was back in the day, there was no Cometic head gaskets back then. It was all Felpro and stuff like that. And I'm like, oh my God. And I've just sold him this engine. And I said, look, dude, sorry about that. If you still want to buy it, I'll take $1,000 off the price, which, you know, by the time you pull it apart and do head gaskets and stuff like that, it's, you know, it won't cost you that much to do. And he's like, yep, cool. So he gives me, you know, the money minus $1,000 and takes the engine away. At the time, that guy owned a very famous Street Machine Valiant, in terms of like a blue S model Valiant that had been featured in Street Machine, and everyone loved this car. So he was going to put that engine in that blue S model Valiant. But I don't think he ever did. I think he never got around to doing that with it. But yeah, that was his intention. He owned the car, and then he bought my 671 360, and he was going to combine the two and make up a pretty cool Summernats cruiser type thing. So yeah, that's what happened with that. And at the time we were sharing, like me and a couple of mates were sharing a industrial unit to work out of, to store our cars and work out of, and that was in Moorebank. And yeah, we would just muck around. They ended up starting a Valiant business, and we went our own separate ways. And I ended up getting my job with Street Commodores magazine. So over this period of time, you know, so I'd gone to Street Commodores with this portfolio of cars that I built, and they're like, holy crap, you built some cars. I'm like, yeah, okay. Yeah, I've had a few. And they're like, you know, then obviously we'll start with Street Commodores, and I've got, what's our family car? I think our family car at the time was, we'd had a AP5 Valiant with a engineered 318 in it, as with push button auto. That was our family car up to a certain point, up until pretty much we got married, and my wife cracked it one day when the push button auto, the buttons sometimes would pop out and not go into their little receptacles, and she got stuck in reverse in a car park, and she just like, I'm done with this car, just get me a car that's reliable. And so I had a little payout from Telstra at the time, and I went down to a car yard and found an EF Falcon. It was 4 years old at the time, and it was $14,000 for this red EF Falcon. And so I laid down 14 grand cash on an EF Falcon. I wish I'd spent that 14 grand on that AP. So that AP Valiant, if I'd put 14 grand into that, it would have been injected, it would have been such a nice car, and it would have been worth money. That EF Falcon, we had it until we eventually gave it away because it was surplus to requirements. When we moved down south, it didn't have cruise control, so the thing was just no cruise control around Sydney's fine. When you're doing all your trips, like hour here, hour there, cruise control gets very handy. So I ended up buying a Falcon with cruise control, and the red one just sat in the yard until I ended up giving it away because to me it was worthless. So anyway, I worked for Street Commodores for a few years, and you know, V6 Vengeance came along. That was all part of that Street Commodores era. V6 Vengeance was a cool thing. It maybe even deserves its own video. I have done some video stuff talking about V6 Vengeance in the past. But yeah, that was a V6 Commodore that we bought that was just going to be my daily driver, but also a project car for the magazine. And the intention was to showcase how to make a V6 Commodore go fast. And eventually we got it into the 11.9s, and that was a pretty rapid car for its time. You know, we're talking early 2000s. I mean, the BA Turbo Falcons had only just come out, and everyone was, you know, like, oh, these things are fast. But to be honest, a stock BA Turbo Falcon was a 14-second car, and I was beating those things naturally aspirated with the V6. And then when I put the turbo on, I was shitting on those things. Of course, it's a different story now. Now that they know how to tune barras and all that sort of stuff, they're a lot faster. But back then, it was the early days of Turbo Falcons, and no one knew what the hell to do with these things. But eventually, they got there. So yeah, Street Commodores for a few years. I also bought the Centura I talked about in the Six Packs magazine. So I bought that car. That was kind of my little hottie. That I was driving, that, you know, my car in the garage that I would do things to. And it had a naturally aspirated 265 in it when I first bought it, so 265 and a 4-speed. It was a pretty decently fast car for its time, but I ended up doing a turbocharged setup in that Centura, turbo carby. I'll never do turbo carby again. I did both ways. I did draw through first, which again, you know, it was okay. And then I tried a blow through setup, and again, it was okay, maybe a little bit better because, you know, you could intercool the blow through setup. but neither of them were great. They only made like 250 rear wheel horsepower. You know, they used to ping their head off and shit like that, and just they were just not great at all. And so I ended up, that was one of the cars that come down to Holbrook with us. In that time, I also built I bought the Valiant wagon that we bought it as for $250. So this is when I had the Charger, and I just kind of finished doing stuff with the Charger at the time. I still had the Charger there, but I bought this wagon, and it was a plain white VG wagon. It had a massive dent in the front guard. We ended up I had a spare set of VG front guards. I put new guards on it and got it re-registered just as this normal 6-cylinder thing. And then I ended up, my mate Peter had a 440 sitting in his shed that he bought for a Cuda, that he was going to do the 440 into this Cuda. But he didn't know what the motor was like. He was like, I bought this motor, it's supposed to be all right. I don't know. I said, well, dude, I'll pull it down. We'll go through it, have a look at it, which I did. I went through, pulled it down, went through it, put it back together, put a decent cam in it, and then we dropped that motor into this Valiant station wagon that I bought, and I'd given a kind of a closed door respray on, and, you know, trimmed the interior and stuff like that. And the wagon was kind of cool. It was plain white Valiant wagon with a 440 727 in it, 8 3/4 Dodge diff in it. We only raced that because Eastern Creek was done at that stage. So we only raced it at Oran Park.
Scott Taylor from Preston in the 440 Valiant wagon, his dial of 9.1, and he was running 9.2s in qualifying, so he's dialing it back a little bit, just taking it a little bit easy. And Jonathan Godfrey in the Lancer dialed 9.0, so he stepped it back as well. Oh, look at the reaction. 0.1 of the Valiant. The big brother in the far lane, the 440, can he hang off? He does. 913 at 99 for the win, the Lures of 9.
And it ran a 870 at Oran Park on the 8th mile, which isn't super fast, but that car was all in the top end. So over the first 8th, it was pretty slow. It was the top end where it started pulling. And I would have loved to put that car on the quarter. I think it would have done even a 13 flat or a high 12 on the quarter. It was, you know, for a street car, it was pretty good. I used to go out hunting WRXs with that thing, and just, man, the looks on their faces when you just hammered them with this old Valiant wagon, it was just priceless. It's a good, fun car. Then Peter was talking about buying that car off me, the wagon, but then he said, you know what, I prefer your Charger, I like your Charger. And it was a moment of weakness. I don't even know why I did it, but I sold it to him, and I sold it to him for what I paid for it. I said, I bought this thing for $3.5 grand. I've had it for 4 years. I've had a heap of fun with it, done a heap of things with it. But I was also conscious of how nice the car was. So you're always careful about scratching it and stuff like that. So I just went, you know what, I'll sell it to you as a roller, and you can put your 440 into that. And that's what he did. He put the 440 in the Charger, got it engineered, like proper papers, the whole thing. It was one of the last big block Valiants engineered in New South Wales, I believe. He still has that car to this day. You know, it's like 20 years later, he's still got that car. And it's covered in a bunch of dust and stuff. I don't think he's done much with it lately. I hope he gets... Peter, if you're seeing this, put your Valiant back on the road. I'd love to see it again. But yeah, very nice car. So anyway, I'd done the Street Commodores thing. I'd decided I was moving out of Sydney, and we're moving south. We'd sold our house out at Horningsea Park, which is where we lived in Sydney, and we're moving down south. And in this time, there'd been a bunch of cars that had come through that place. You know, I mean, I've only really just touched on them. Like, I had a couple C20 pickups. I had a C20 pickup that I bought from the guys at Sydney Competition Warehouse. That was their shop truck. So I bought this 6-cylinder C20 pickup that I'd used for, you know, as my pickup there for a while. And then I bought another C20 from a guy that had a big block in it. I was going to put that big block in my C20, which had a bit better of a body, but that never ended up happening. I was one of those guys that had too many projects. I had probably 7 projects on the go, and it's too many. You've got to concentrate on 1 or 2 projects. You can't go having 7 projects. They end up, you spread yourself too thin. So I ended up selling the big block to a guy called Chris Hillman, is that his name? No, I don't think it was Hillman. But anyway, a guy used to race a really tough 56 Chevy in there in Sydney, so he bought the big block off me. The C20 went to Matt, the Fat 57. It wasn't him, but it was his business partner. But Mark with Fat 57, he ended up buying, well, his business partner bought that C20 off me, and they were going to do some stuff with that. And yeah, so we decided we're moving down to Holbrook. So the cars, at that stage, I had a genuine 2-door Pacer in the shed that I was going to do something with. That was a matching numbers car, but it had a cracked chassis. I was going to repair the chassis, but because we had to move, I had to get rid of some cars. I wish I'd kept that 2-door Pacer because, like I said, numbers matching. It was white with a red interior. It was actually kind of a rare combo. It's worth bucks. Like 2-door Pacer and matching numbers. Man, if that car's not worth 40 or 50 grand, I'd be surprised. And I think I sold it for like 2 grand, maybe. You know, like just stupid. But it was superfluous to my requirements at the time. So end up taking the Valiant wagon down with us, V6 Vengeance, the Centura, and our family Falcon. I think that's all we took to Holbrook. And I know this video is getting a bit longer now. So we took those cars down to Holbrook. I had a big shed down there. When we originally moved into there, we had a long settlement, and so we were giving the sellers time to move out. So we ended up having to rent a property at the other end of town for 6 months. So we originally took all our shit to this other property, sat it there for 6 months and lived there, and then when the settlement happened, we moved into our house proper. So we had to move all this shit from one end of town to the other, and rather than hire a truck, what I did was I bought a short bed 69, I think it was a 69, short bed 69 F100 pickup bump side thing, and again with ideas that I was going to hot it up and maybe use it as a project car for Street Machine Fords at the time, which I'd just become editor of. And I used that truck. We had to go, it was a funny story with that. So to buy this thing, I bought it on eBay, sight unseen. It was down at the Mornington Peninsula or somewhere, and we were in Holbrook. So I had to take my wife and daughter, drive down all the way down there, and then we come back. And of course, when we thought, oh, we'll come back via the mountains. Now, I don't know if any of you have driven over Hotham, but it's pretty high. So we come up from Mornington across through Bairnsdale and Sale and then up over Hotham. So my wife's in her Falcon, freaking out because like she'd never done a road like that before in her life. I'm in this F truck I've just bought. It is the rustiest, shittiest piece of shit you've ever seen. And we're going up over Hotham, and that was a bit scary, I've got to say, in that car. It didn't feel very safe at the time. And then I come back down, we come down the mountain, down through Brighton, and I get pulled up at this bloody RBT, and I never even knew this was the thing. It was a warrant check thing. It was like they were checking for outstanding warrants and stuff on people, you know. So pulled in, and the cops are looking at this F truck going, is this actually registered? And I'm like, it has a week's rego on it, and please don't pull me off the road. I've got to get home with this thing. It's driven from here to there at the moment. Like, it's made it this far. I've got an hour and a half to go. Please let me just get home. And they went, yep. So, and I had obviously no outstanding warrants or anything like that. But yeah, we ended up taking it up to Holbrook, and I used it to move all our shit from one end of town to the other in multiple trips. But yeah, and then, like I said, I planned to do things with that truck and never did, and ended up selling it on eBay, and it went to Sydney. I never saw it again. So I ended up selling a few cars on eBay. It used to be a place where you could actually sell things with a reasonable expectation that they would be sold and picked up and taken away, and eBay used to be a place you could do things like that. Now it's just a place where you just go and visit people's stores and buy things, because actually buying and selling stuff on eBay is a nightmare these days. So it's really bad. But yeah, so had V6 Vengeance there, had the Centura there, mucked around with the Centura a bit. Ended up selling that on eBay to a guy. It is now a twin turbo V8. It's floating around down here in Melbourne. It was tubbed at the time, but they've redone the tubs because I had an oopsie with a thing at an event called Sydney Car Festival. I'd taken in the burnout comp and I'd clipped the wall with the rear quarter. And kinked the rear quarter, and it ended up at All Race and got retubbed and caged and twin turbo V8. I haven't seen the car lately, but it is still floating around down here in Melbourne, and yeah, a bit of a toughie. So sold that. V6 Vengeance, my mate in Holbrook owns that. I'll have to check in with him. I haven't checked with him for a little bit, but see if he's still got that car. I found a Valiant Ute in Holbrook sitting behind the local mechanics. It'd been sitting there for a while, and I said, "What are you doing with that Valiant Ute?" He said, "Oh, well, sell it if you want it." And I'm like, "Okay, well, what do you want?" $250. Boom, bought it. Took it to my place, and I started doing stuff with it. So I'd obviously had my other wagon, which I'd converted from white to orange. I'd sprayed it in that shed at Holbrook, and it actually turned out half decent. And again, turbo 6 and played with it, and then ended up putting a nice tough 265 in it. But that happened down here in Melbourne. Yeah, that 6-cylinder wagon was a lot of fun. I started doing that ute. I was going to make that ute into my street and strip car. However, again, I worked on it for like an hour a day, doing stuff just to split it up. And that's a good way of making progress. I made a lot of progress when I committed myself to doing an hour a day on that car. I made a lot of progress. That's a good way to do things. But when I moved down here, I had to reconsolidate my cars again, and I'd thought, well, okay, well, I can't keep them all, so I'll keep the VG wagon. We had 2 Falcon wagons at this stage that I bought to replace our other Falcons, so EL Falcon wagons, because they had cruise control and they were cheap to run and cheap to buy, and they made good, family cars. So we had a couple of those. And we moved down here. We had the couple Falcon wagons. We had the VG wagon were brought down, and then Dad's Ute stayed up at Holbrook for a bit until I picked it up. My father-in-law bought our old place, so the lockdown wagon and Dad's Ute stayed up there for the time being. And then as things went on, I brought them down. So. But yeah, I also had an ex-police VH Charger, a South Australian car, a light blue South Australian ex-police, not Charger, Commodore, VH Commodore, that I'd sold to a guy who ended up in Melbourne. I believe he was going to resto it. So yeah, I had to clear out a bunch of cars that were all good project cars for people, but yeah, just again, too many projects. This is the problem we fall into. We find these new projects and we go, I'm going to grab that, and you end up with all these projects and you don't know where to focus your efforts. So it's something I'm going to try and not fall into here at Scotty's Garage. I want to concentrate on a couple cars at a time, and that's about it. So anyway, so we come down here, and I sold that ute to a guy in Albury, Wodonga for $1,000. So I technically made money on it, but I'll tell you what, that was a good, I wish I had that shell now. I would pay $1,000 for that shell now. Like, it was a good VF ute, poverty pack sort of Valiant ute, but just clean, relatively rust free, great shell. Man, I would love to have built that into a nice street strip car. But yeah, I've had some interesting cars over the years, and to be honest, I think I've left out a whole bunch because I've had a bunch of Pacer coupes, but again, you know, some of them have been parted out. Some of these cars have been parts cars. I've had Valiants I've bought on the side of the road for $500 and dropped V8s into and had fun with, and then moved on to something else. I mean, yeah, I could talk about all this stuff for a whole day and probably still leave stuff out, but still. We had some good times. God, there's a car, and also forgot my mate's, I bought a VG sedan off a mate that he'd taken me to look at it, and we've looked at it and worked out as a pretty tidy, rust-free car. And he went, I'm going to buy this thing. And he ended up buying a VIP front, put that on it, and 265 with a torque flight, and a thing ripped. Like, that car was, he used to do like 60 footers at the drags. Like, it was ridiculous for what it was. A 60 footer for that car. It was just ridiculously fast off the line. But yeah, I ended up buying that car off him and using it again as a bit of a daily for a while until ended up parting it out and selling it off to, you know, the shell went to one guy, and, you know, the VIP front went to another guy, and the engine box went to someone else. You know, it's just one of those things that, yeah, these cars, they come through your life, and yeah, sometimes you're better off for it and they're better off for it, and sometimes they're not better off for it, you know, for coming into your life. You know, some of these cars you probably shouldn't have touched. Yeah. So anyway, I hope this has been interesting. I feel like I've rambled a little bit. I'm going to have to look at this video when I edit it and see if it is interesting. But yeah, there's a lot going on, a lot of cars we've played with, and I hope it's been interesting for you. So if it hasn't, I might reshoot this into a more interesting format, but we'll see, and we'll see if I've got enough pictures to support all this. But anyway, hope you enjoyed it. We'll see you next time. Come back and see us, and make sure you click like and subscribe. Scotty's Garage, here we are. Let's get back into the cars. Like, I'd built a couple engines, but this was the first probably serious put together engine I'd ever done. Now it's gonna fucking rain. Well, shit.